Hi, I'm Gareth Greenaway. This week on FLOSS Weekly, Joe Brockmeier and I will be filling in for Randall Schwartz. We'll be speaking with Hugh Howey, author of Wool, about self-publishing and how it relates to open source software. Up next.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for FLOSS Weekly is provided by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is FLOSS Weekly, episode 307, recorded September 3rd, 2014, self-publishing.
Hi, this is Joe Brockmeier, and this is a new episode of FLOSS Weekly. I'm going to be joined today by Gareth Greenaway. As you may notice, our usual host, Randall Schwartz, is on vacation, so we're taking the reins. Welcome back, Gareth.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks for having me back.
So we talk all the time, but we have never actually co-hosted a show before, so this should be kind of interesting. What have you been up to in the off season for Scale?
Well, I mean, there's unfortunately very little off season for Scale. We get about a month or so off, and then we're right back into the planning. So I would say the off season I've been doing very, very little. All right. Have you guys announced dates yet? We have. So it's February. I'm gonna flub it. I know 19th through the 22nd, I think, in Los Angeles, California, 2015, and it's actually a different setup this year. We're going to be a 4-day show rather than a 3-day show, so that should be interesting. So you're starting on Thursday this year? We're gonna start on Thursday. Yeah, we're gonna have some. Well, we haven't determined what exactly we're going to be doing on Thursday, but we're going to have a Thursday content at the show. Things will happen on Thursday. Just show up; it'll be great. You know what? I've been to enough scales to actually buy into that theory, because it always is an excellent show. So let's move on to the topic for this week's show. Speaking of conferences, our guest today is Hugh Howey, and he is actually going to keynote ApacheCon Europe in Budapest in November. You may, if you're familiar with open source, that name may not jump out to you, but he's a very relevant person for ApacheCon, I think. He is going to be talking at ApacheCon about democratizing literature through self-publishing. Now, Hugh Howey has spent 8 years as a yacht captain before giving up the seafaring life and taking up writing. His New York Times best-selling Wool series has been translated into more than 30 languages and has been optioned for a feature film by Ridley Scott and Steve Zalen. He lives in Jupiter, Florida with his wife Amber and their dog Bella. And when he's not writing, he's taking pictures or talking to strangers. So welcome to the show, Hugh.
Thanks. Here I am talking to strangers.
At first, when I read your bio, I read it as taking pictures of strangers, which I just thought could be problematic. But then you live in Florida, and Florida is kind of one of those, it's the only state with its own tag on FARC. So maybe people would actually do that.
Yeah, people are pretty open to it here. I ask permission first, and I don't just do it here. I do it when I travel. And there are some countries where people aren't as keen on it. I was in Taiwan this year, and everyone loves to have their picture taken, and no matter what age you are, everyone flashes the peace sign when you do it. But in Germany, people are very wary of it. People have got angry with me in Germany asking if I could take their picture. But they're beautiful and interesting people everywhere, and I like capturing them. I think it helps me as a writer to look at the world through a lens. So that's one thing I enjoy doing.
That does sound pretty cool. Let's talk a little bit about the self-publishing thing. I kind of think there are some parallels really between self-publishing and open source, but I want to find out from you, how did you get started on that? Because the conventional wisdom, of course, is that self-publishing is bad. You're never going to make any money by just putting stuff out there on your own.
Yeah, the reality is you're not going to make money through art, no matter how you go about it. I worked in a bookstore for years, and I saw how many New York Times bestsellers came to our bookstore and gave talks and would talk to me about their day job, and I was shocked to learn just how few people make a living writing. So I think we should be honest about the chances of making a living with any form of art. The beauty of self-publishing is that a lot of books get turned down at publishers because there's no place to shelve them at a bookstore. It's too between genres, or editors are sick of a certain genre and they think it's tired and it's done. But there's new readers coming up all the time, and I think readers have a more voracious appetite for books than publishing output. So self-publishing has flourished for thousands of writers because there's a bigger demand than there is output from publishing houses, especially in certain genres. So I think there's a lot of similarities between open source and self-publishing. And in fact, I think what self-publishing is doing is getting back to the root of storytelling, which was a very communal endeavor. It was not one person sitting in some corner of a cave alone, coming up with a story whole cloth and presenting it in a way that it can never be changed or edited and would stand, as like an edifice for all of time. The way story developed was through an interaction between the storyteller and the audience, and audience members would memorize the story, embellish it, make changes, and retell it later. And this is how the Iliad, the Odyssey. This is even how a lot of our religious texts were put together. So it's a great old tradition. The novel is something that's kind of new, and I think not as interesting. And what we're seeing with fan fiction, with wiki novels, with stories on Wattpad, where you have a lot of interaction between the audience and the storyteller, that gets back to the root of how we told stories, which was collaboratively and in a very open source kind of hacker maker manner.
Do you incorporate any of that into your work? Are you getting feedback from your audience as you're writing, or are you putting things out there before you officially hit the button and publish things? Or
yeah, my best-selling work, Wool, was published in parts. So they came out every 3 or 4 weeks. It was very much like Dickens released a lot of his novels, and Dickens read the reviews and read what people were saying in the newspapers. People were waiting on he invented the cliffhanger, and it was a very literal cliffhanger. But people waited anxiously for each installment of his work. And he also, which I think people don't appreciate enough, is when he published these in a compiled novel, he actually made slight changes to the work. So it wasn't exactly just compressing the stories together and releasing them as a novel. He modified them again. And, Shakespeare, I'm sure, took into account the reaction from the audience, like what jokes were killing and which ones weren't, and used that to modify future stories, maybe even the stories that we've come to know and love. So I liken it to performing live as a musician in front of an audience. I think it's much more beneficial to have that feedback and know what sets work and which sets don't, and what they're calling for in an encore. To not use that seems less artistic to me than the idea of, what I think as an artist is the only true way, and if the audience doesn't get it, they shouldn't be a part of it. I see that attitude with a lot of writers, and it's a very modern attitude. It's not who we are as storytellers.
Well, I think there is sort of a picture of the novel as being a something from a single person, right? Where it is a single narrative voice as opposed to a collaborative effort. So that's interesting. I wonder if a slight digression. I wonder if we could get the next Game of Thrones novel a little faster if we started having George R.R. Martin do it in a newspaper every week instead of the way he's writing now.
There's something interesting about that, the idea of a novel as a single person. Even publishers, if you look at their claim that, hey, self-publishing is horrible because no one can write a book alone, how does that jibe with the attitude of non-collaborative storytelling being superior? Most first readers probably are spouses. I know mine is, and most of my friends, their first reader is a spouse, and they have input. I'm sitting here with edits from my wife on my upcoming, my next novel. Then I have an agent who will give me input. Even my foreign and film agent will give me input on my work. the editor that I hire to go through my work, my beta readers, all these people have input, and that happens in the traditional publishing, which I've worked with Simon & Schuster and Random House with books, and those are not solitary endeavors either. So what we use now is someone guessing what the readers will think, and why not use what the readers think instead? It seems more direct and more honest that way.
So did you get into self-publishing? Did you start that, straight away, or did you have experience with traditional publishing and just say, this is not working, and I want to go ahead and take all this work on myself? Because you mentioned, hiring an editor and hiring other people, an agent and all that stuff. So you're taking on a lot of the things that publishers usually sell as a reason for their existence.
Yeah, my first book I queried and got a traditional publishing contract with a small press. And it's interesting, actually, just last night I was looking for some old ISBN numbers, and I came across the email that I sent to my publisher 5 years ago to let them know that they sent me a contract for my second book, and I wrote this really painful email to write to say, I think I'm going to try to self-publish this book, and I'm going to go down this route. It was interesting reading the response from the publisher, who I still have a great relationship with. I've dedicated one of my books since then to my editor there. I love her to death, but she told me she thought it was a mistake for me to go this route. But I saw the changes that were happening in technology. These are the changes that have impacted the hacker collaborative culture, the open source culture. So, and I use hacker there in the purer sense of people figuring things out and not people doing something malicious. So I saw these technology changes, which was the cost of production and distribution were plummeting, and the ease of collaboration were increasing. And as those things intersected, it's created a marketplace where, you say that I took on a lot of the stuff that publishers do. I work just as hard for my traditional publishers as I do self-publishing. In a lot of ways, self-publishing is much easier than traditional publishing because I just hire someone to do the exact same thing, but I get to work with the people that I choose. If I don't like working with an editor or a cover artist, I can hire someone else, and I work on my time schedule. Instead of waiting for a publisher to spring something on me and say, we need these edits next week, I send something to someone else and say, hey, I'd like to have this by next week. It's an inversion of responsibility, it's an inversion of the reward system, and it's an inversion of the control. And having the control and the reward has made me so happy as an artist, even before I was making money doing it.
So going back to the topic of comparing open source to kind of publishing, what aspects of open source, like say software development, do you think the publishing industry can learn from, and vice versa?
Well, the power of open source is that it's a bottom-up structure. So all of the intelligence and all of the skill and all the great ideas are at the bottom of the pyramid. And those ideas percolate up through a power structure until you get to the final product at the top. You have the people on these other layers are managing and harnessing the skills beneath them and directing that into a final product. What you have in large corporations, and I see this really massively in publishers, is you have people at the top who want to delegate, and they think they have all the ideas and they have all the knowledge. I mean, I've been in meetings with publishers where they were telling me things that I knew were wrong, and I was just like, okay, just sit and listen to them and then go do what I know is right, and the results are much bigger than they would have been if I had taken this advice, because I communicate with all the authors, all these indie authors. We share all of our data, we share what works, we share ideas, we share our sales information, our earnings, our everything that we learn. And all those great ideas percolate across the bottom of this massive, beautiful pyramid. And I think publishers need to learn how to tap into that talent and that sales force instead of really just saying, give us the manuscript and then just stay away until we call upon you or we need you to do an interview or something. Right now, publishers are having to lay people off because they're not harnessing their most talented, their most knowledgeable, and their most valuable asset, which is their authors. Open source projects work the opposite way. They understand, and I've been a part of this in wikis. My programming skills are rubbish, even though I studied that in college. I've lost most of my Java skills. But I've seen this in wikis, how what you do is you have so many enthusiastic people, and the challenge is taking all of their great ideas and their input and harnessing it into a final product.
So traditionally, like open source projects, like software projects, it's not one person traditionally writing all the code. There's many, many collaborators. Have you ever considered writing a book in that way, where other people can contribute, like patches, if you will, to the story, and kind of change the way the story is written?
Yeah, that's how the troubleshooting is done. Yeah, there's a lot of similarities with, and I've written enough code to know how frustrating it is to find a bug, and to how important comments are in your code so that people can understand what you did and look for issues. Well, typos are the bug of publishing, and I use a beta reading network to help not just find typos, but to find plot holes and inconsistencies and places where the work can be improved. But a more direct collaborative effort is, I can't quite announce it yet, it's kind of top secret, but I'm working on a project where a lot of people are going to be contributing stories, and what we're using Google Docs to coordinate all of our input and our ideas, and it's basically like writing a novel with a hive mind. It's fascinating to watch, and already I see how you end up with a plot and a project that's grander in scope and complexity and elegance than anything that any of us could have created on our own. There's a great book out right now called Smarter Than You Think. Just read it over vacation this summer in 2 sittings. It's a brilliant book, but it's how people are smarter when they coordinate with machines, but it also talks about collaborative efforts and how when people in groups are smarter than individual experts. And there's been other books like The Wisdom of Crowds about this, but it's a very real phenomenon, and it's something that if more people understood, we would have more efficiency and I think better output from publishing.
Now, what about one of the things where maybe it separates a little bit from code? You don't really care so much in open source. I don't care about Linus's coding style versus Greg Kroah-Hartman's coding style when it comes to the kernel. I really only care that the kernel works and, that it's optimized to run best on my hardware, all that good stuff. But if I'm reading, say, a novel by Kurt Vonnegut, I care about not only the plot and where the story goes, but I also care about the phrasing and the voice of that. And do you lose any of that when you're talking about a collaborative process where, you have somebody like, Vonnegut or John Irving or somebody that has a very strong voice and phrasing, or like Douglas Copeland, where they have a very unique style, and, collaboration may water that down a little bit.
I think what I've seen as a reader, some of my favorite writers, Charles Todd, who's that's the name of an author, but it's he writes with his mother together under the name Charles Todd. Also, Douglas Preston and Lincoln Child write together these Pendergast mysteries, which I love. And I've also read with Preston and Child are a great example, because I've read Douglas Preston's work, his individual work, and I've read Lincoln Child's individual work. And what happens when they collaborate is they have a unified voice, but it's a little different than their individual voices. Because the way they work, they do multiple passes over each other's text. They might alternate chapters, but they start revising each other's work. And what you get is a chorus rather than a solo. And, to say that choruses aren't beautiful, I've heard a lot of harmonizing in choruses that are haunting and gorgeous and beautiful, and I've heard solo works that I love, and I think there's room for both and to celebrate both. So yeah, if you want to read Kurt Vonnegut, you can only get that by reading Kurt Vonnegut. But if you imagine, if you locked Kurt Vonnegut and William Shakespeare in a room together, who wouldn't love seeing that duet and what they came up with? It'd be a completely different style, but it would be genius. It would be wonderful. I would want to read it. So I think we have to look at them not as trying to capture the same thing, but what we're losing by not having more collaborative storytelling.
Okay. To go back a little bit, since we're talking about open source and publishing, where do you fall with, Creative Commons licensing and open source licensing for your work? Do you use a Creative Commons license at all? Or have you considered that?
The only place I've used it's in a side project I'm doing with a friend, where we're publishing some surveys and some publishing data gathered from Amazon's website. We give all of our data dump under a Creative Commons, so anyone can use it as long as they don't profit from it. The other way that I've done something similar is I've opened my worlds up to fan fiction, and people can publish stories based in my world, and they can profit from. They can put it up for sale, charge money, and keep all the profit. I don't ask for recognition. I don't have stipulations that you even have to say this is based on Hugh Howey such and such. You can just write in my worlds, charge money, and allow, like some of these pictures hanging on the wall behind me are artwork done by an artist named Ben Adams. He draws in my worlds and sells prints, and I don't take a penny from it. So do I employ a Creative Commons license and make it formal? No, I don't even do that. I just don't sue people, and I encourage other artists to make money off of making my readers happy and taking my readers for their own, either be their own readers or in Ben Adams's case to be fans of his artwork and to support him through Patreon. So my attitude, I think, is probably even laxer than a Creative Commons attitude. It's just one of, hey, this is collaborative, it's community based. Let's lift all ships instead of worrying about who's using my stuff and who's taking my ideas and all that. I don't worry about that stuff at all. I post plot ideas on my website, like this is an upcoming book I'm thinking of doing, and I'll post the idea, and I see people terrified of giving away their ideas, but it doesn't trouble me at all. It's execution. That's 99% of it. The idea is like 1% of it.
Now that side project that you mentioned, you're talking about author-earnings.com there?
Correct.
Do you want to talk a little bit about what that is and what the project does? I know you mentioned you give away the data, but maybe go into a little more detail on what that is.
Yeah, it's a validation of what this community of self-published writers are accomplishing, and largely because of the exploratory nature of readers who don't just look for the stuff that everyone else is reading, but explore what's on the marketplace. So there's a fear with self-publishing that it's just going to be a bunch of dreck, and it's going to clog up the publishing marketplace, which is bizarre to me because it's I always think of the internet. Anyone can create a blog or a website, and we don't trip over all of the ones that we want. Instead, they're all out there, and when someone discovers something great, it's shared and percolates up to the top. So I know from going to conferences and meeting a lot of people who are doing really well with self-publishing that this is a phenomenon, that there's a lot of people making a living with their writing. And are the percentages high of the number of people trying it? Probably not, but the absolute number of people making a living has probably gone up 10 times, maybe 20 times in the last 5 years. And that's a huge change. So what we've done is we've gathered data on 120,000 titles on Amazon's bestseller list. And we can know with most of them how many of them are, how they're published, where they're priced, by knowing their ranking and publicly shared data from authors on what their sales per day equals with each ranking. We can have a really good idea on what they're selling that day, and we can look at market share. And what we found is that for these 120,000 titles, which is a huge sample size, that self-published authors are out-earning traditionally published authors combined. And this is the shadow industry that we've seen in the trenches, and we've just never had the data to back it up, and now we do.
All right. So a lot of questions following off of that. One that comes to mind is, so you're talking about you're getting most of this data from Amazon. It seems like a lot of the self-publishing ebook stuff is now focused around Amazon, and is that Is that a problem? Because, you know, we've seen the way Amazon is behaving with some of its traditional publishers, which worries people. Are there any concerns around that, with Amazon kind of being the biggest platform for self-publishing with the Kindle and all of that?
I think there's a lot of worry with how big some institutions have gotten in publishing. Along with Amazon having dominance with ebook sales, you also have the Penguin Random House merger, which makes them as big as the rest of the big five publishers combined. I think on the latest bestseller list, like 7 out of 10 books were from Penguin Random House. So that's fewer places for authors and agents to submit their works. Barnes & Noble, I think, accounts for half of all brick and mortar bookstore sales. So they've got an incredible amount of dominance there. I got caught up in that a couple years ago when they blacklisted Simon & Schuster authors, and it was while I was on book tour for my book with Simon & Schuster, and Barnes & Noble's refusing to carry Simon & Schuster titles until Simon & Schuster ponied up more co-op money. So we've seen these struggles before, and anytime there's market dominance like that, you have to be wary of you concentrate, like, what are they doing? Because their actions dictate a large part of the market. However, to fear what Amazon might do in the future, they would have to do a lot to even equal the abuses that authors suffer at the hands of publishers right now. We're paid 70% of the list price for an ebook. Publishers pay us about 15% of the list price. So Amazon would have to become 1/5 as generous as they are now before they're even equal to what you can get on the other side of the aisle. Also, self-publishing, the cool thing about it, again, this kind of goes in with open source. I'm not giving them the rights to my work. You know, if you contribute to an open source project, you can use the code that you create elsewhere. Other people can too. So the cool thing is ownership. I'm not giving up. Publishers demand ownership of your artwork for your life plus another 70 years, which is the term of copyright. That's just onerous. It doesn't make sense in a world where books don't go out of print anymore. So I will side with Amazon until they become 1/5 of the force for good that they are now, at which point they'll be equal to publishers, and then I'll have to make a choice between the two.
Published on other platforms, though, or are there ways to buy your books if you're somebody using the Nook or another platform, an EPUB platform? Are there ways to get your titles in a format other than the Kindle?
Absolutely. Kobo is a great source for EPUB files, which a lot of devices use. I do all my ebooks DRM free. I also, my books are on Nook and iTunes, on Kobo. They're also available directly through my website. If you want a DRM file and you don't want your money going to some company because you disagree with them, you can get it right off my website. But the best place to get my books, and I don't condone this for other authors, I want artists to make a living, but I'm doing very well for myself. So I've never worried about piracy, and I don't try to get my books taken down from pirate sites. Easiest place to get my books is through torrents or something like that. I put a button on my website because I had people emailing me saying they loved my book, but they stole it or they got it from a friend and they felt guilty. So I put a little Jolly Roger button on my website, and it says, you know, already downloaded it, not a problem. You can pay for it here if you want to. And people use that button every single day, and they often overpay. They'll say they enjoyed a book, and then they'll pay me double what the ebook price is. So, you know, I don't worry about stuff like that. I want my stories available everywhere.
I want to back up and hear that again. So you actually encourage people to torrent your work, and then, you know, if they want to later, sort of an amnesty program where they can come back and donate after the fact.
If they want to. I only put that button up because I had people, people were complaining about two things. That people complained that my ebook prices are too low. So not everyone feels that way. I want people who can't afford to buy all the books that they want to read. I think the way to encourage reading is to make it very affordable. So I don't want to raise prices just because some people complain that they're too low. I put I put that button up for them, but also for the people who felt bad after reading it. You know, it's one of the happiest days of my life was the day that I searched a Where site and found one of my books, because before that, I would search the torrents for my name and nothing would come up. And to me, that was an indicator of lack of demand. And I think one of the not being pirated is one of the saddest fates that an artist can suffer.
So you actually consider, just to confirm what you said there, you actually consider it a good thing to be pirated. It's a rite of passage in a way.
Absolutely. You know, I used to go to used bookstores all the time growing up. It never occurred to me until I started publishing for myself that I was leaving the author and the publisher out of that transaction, that the reader was making a little bit of money back to sell their book back, and the establishment was making a lot of money. But it's the same with video games. You know, I don't like to buy used video games now that I can afford not to. I think it's great if that's the only way you can afford to play them, to do it that way. But I want to make sure that my money gets back to the artists and to the publishers and distributors. So why do we worry about piracy, but we don't worry about used bookstores, or we don't worry about someone come over to my house and seeing a book on my shelf they've always wanted to read and then saying, can I borrow it? And me saying, like, that's stealing. You know, we don't do that. And when authors find out that someone read a book and then they pass it around to everyone in their family, they get so excited about that. So why do we treat piracy any different? I don't understand. It's all the same thing. It's all your work being enjoyed. And obscurity to me is far more terrifying as an artist than piracy.
So along those lines, I mean, you mentioned that none of your ebooks have DRM, and you mentioned going to the used bookstore or borrowing books from a friend, or kind of along those lines. Do you think eventually the ebook, kind of the way that those work right now, do you think it will change in a way that DRM will go away because it just doesn't work, or do you think it'll stick around for a while?
I think it'll stick around for a lot of the publishers. You know, there's one science fiction publisher, I'm pretty sure it was Tor, but I could be getting that wrong, who got rid of DRM. And some of the other publishers, actually Hachette sent out, one of the CEOs for Hachette in Great Britain sent out an email urging people to not support this and to fight some other publisher making a decision to get rid of DRM. They were so terrified of this. We did an analysis on Author Earnings where we looked at whether or not books with and without DRM, that's one of the pieces of metadata that we can pull from over 120,000 titles. The books without DRM are vastly outselling the books with DRM. Now, this isn't necessarily causation. It could be that the savvy self-published author who understands his market and understands his readers is as down on DRM as he is savvy about other things that she can do with her work. So it's not that one causes another, but what our data does show is that it certainly isn't a hindrance. If lack of DRM hurt sales, we wouldn't be seeing the data we're seeing, which is that non-DRM titles vastly outsell DRM titles. Even saw the creators behind the Game of Thrones series credit piracy with the wild popularity of their series. I think people are crazy to lock up their artwork. Publishers are absolutely out of their minds to embrace DRM, and the quicker we can get rid of it, the more reading will flourish instead of being hampered. People should be able to read the books that they buy on any device they own, and they should own them for the rest of their lives. They should be able to make backup copies, and we should be able to convert those to keep up with changes in technology and changes in formats.
So what other DRM aside, what other kind of radical changes do you think are on the horizon for the publishing industry?
It's hard to say. I mean, I think we're going to see more. Unfortunately, we're going to see more consolidation. The music industry went from a big 6 to a big 3, and I think we're on the way to publishing having probably 3 main publishers. I think the most interesting thing happening in publishing right now is that independent bookstores are having, for the last 3 years, they've had nearly double-digit percentage growth, and the number of independent bookstores that are open are at a high since, I think, 1997. I have a theory. It's my Rochambeau theory of book retailers. What we saw back in the 80s and 90s is that big box discounters came in and really just destroyed independent booksellers. There's even that great Tom Hanks movie, You've Got Mail, about that effect. And I worked in a Barnes & Noble while I was putting myself through college, so I've been a part of that process. But when Amazon started selling books in great numbers, they really competed with big box retailers in a way that they couldn't, with price and selection. And it's put Borders out of business. It's hurting, Barnes & Noble and Books A Million. Walden Books is gone. They were part of Borders. And so I think what's happened is you introduced a predator that took out a different predator, and independent bookstores are benefiting. So I think the future of publishing will be a lot of people, the majority will get their books from Amazon, both print and ebook, but communities that are large enough will have independent bookstores that start to thrive and have a great place for literature culture in their community. And I think libraries as well need credit and cultivation. I think that's a place that we could create more excitement around reading and writing.
Yeah, I would say that you've seen a lot of communities rally behind the brick and mortar stores. Like, I live in St. Louis, and there's not as many bookstores as there once were, but people have kind of rallied behind the independent booksellers here, like Left Bank Books. I used to live in Denver, and Tattered Cover has a lot of love. I knew a lot of people who would make a point of buying things at Tattered Cover, even regardless of whether it cost a few bucks more than Amazon. And of course, Powell's in Portland is nationally famous. So there are still a lot of brick and mortar places that are clinging to life, if not having a resurgence right now. I had a question. You kind of mentioned a little while back, talking a little bit about promotions and things like that, and getting the word out about books. That's one of the services that publishers offer that I think maybe a lot of authors don't have the skill set for. So what would you recommend to someone, she's written a really great book and wants to get it out there and doesn't really know where to start when it comes to promoting her work?
Well, the first thing I would say is, I don't think that's a place that publishers have an advantage. I've just had a friend send me what a publisher told them they would do if he signed with them, and it was really sad. I mean, they thought it was comical. I thought it was sad, because it was things that we know don't work. It's things that I've known as a bookseller do not work. And I've got another friend, H.M. Ward, who's been offered 8 figures for book series that she's written. She's sold millions of books and has made tens of millions of dollars on her own. And she's been offered tens of millions of dollars just for a book series, and they've told her what they would do to promote it. And she's written back to them to say that those were all the wrong things, and that her promotion efforts are much stronger than theirs, which is why she's outselling them. So, I've worked with publishers, and I've been lucky to be in the top tier where you actually get a lot of promotional energy. But I've also I work with a lot of friends and a lot of colleagues who, with their publisher, they basically got nothing. I think some of the more creative things and powerful things you can do now is just to relate to your readers, which publishers are now asking authors to do more and more. They want to know what your social media platform is. They want you to do videos and interviews, and they want you to get on the road and go to conferences and do appearances, which usually comes out of your own pocket. So there's a lot of overlap in what's expected between self-published and traditionally published authors now. And as those two converge, the giving up the enormous difference in royalties just isn't worth it. So what would I recommend someone do as a self-published author? There's nothing you can do that's better than writing more works. The biggest advantage that you have is the fact that you can release 3 books a year if you want. You can write in different genres. You have no publication schedule. You don't have anyone telling you can't do so. I mean, this morning I was looking at the PDF proofs of my children's picture book, which no publisher would ever let me do. I write, horror novels and science fiction that's really brutal, and now I've got a what I consider a romance novel coming out this year, and I've got a children's picture book. My readers are super excited about these things, and I would never be able to get permission from a publisher to do this sort of stuff. So the biggest advantage is to keep writing, to have fun, to produce content for your readers. Just being yourself and connecting with readers is another big advantage. Having a blog or being on social media and just sharing your day to day. Don't promote your books. Just let people into your creative process and let them into your lives. And if you write something that captures their imagination, they'll be excited to support you because they'll like that their money is going directly to you and not to the bookstore or a big corporation. There's so many advantages to having that direct relationship. It motivates you, it makes you happier to know your readers directly, and it makes them excited to have a relationship with someone whose work they enjoy. There's absolutely nothing but awesome sauce that comes out of that.
So are you saying it's the publishers that have been holding us back from a Stephen King's children book?
Yeah, I think Stephen King could probably do it, but even someone like Jim Carrey made the decision to self-publish a picture book because it's a very hard area to crack, doing a picture book. And I know an author who's got over 20 books published and has made his publisher a lot of money. And he was moaning to me one day about, like, he's got this great idea for a children's picture book and he can't get any publisher to pick it up. And I told him to self-publish it. And he was like, he just can't do that. He cannot. He comes from the older school, and he thinks that it's not as real. But the children's book that I have coming out, I think it's one of the coolest projects I've ever done. I've loved working with an artist. Again, it goes back to that collaborative storytelling process, and I think having that freedom is, the freedom to price our books where we want, to write what we believe in, to break the rules of genre. This is the flourishing of so many voices in literature, and it's the democratization of literature. And how anyone can be against this, to me, is just baffling. If we took the same exact arguments and applied them to the web, we would call it censoring. We would say, okay, only certain people can publish websites, only certain people can blog. If you don't have permission, or if you're not writing the right stuff, you're not allowed to do it. And the stuff I hear from the people who are against self-publishing, it sounds like China's attitude toward the news, and how everyone doesn't see the parallels and see how damaging that attitude is. It's baffling to me that it's not immediately obvious to everyone all at the same time.
So you mentioned a couple of the ways that that authors should be promoting themselves. What are some of you mentioned that, some of the things that publishers wanted them to do were wrong. So what are some of the wrong things that publishers would encourage people to do? Because I think there may be some crossover for open source projects too that are looking for, for a wider audience.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this is something that would apply to open source, but I was sent on a book tour one time, and I was told not to talk about myself, concentrate on the book. And I know from having, successfully published 9 books before this one and quit my day job and making a steady living, that people, their eyes glaze over if you start talking about the plot of the book. I don't want to hear about the plot of a book when someone recommends it to me. If someone tells me, about a book like Ready Player One, I want them to say, like, oh my God, this is the best thing I've read in forever. So this author is a huge fan of the 80s. He's like obsessed with the 80s. I'm like, okay, that's enough. Like, just stop right there. I want to read the book. I don't want to know anything about it. I don't want spoilers. So, going in and telling people about the plot, like it just can't be done in a way that's going to suck you in. But if I go and tell people, like, hey, so Ridley Scott picked up this book and it was self-published, people are like, wait, so Ridley Scott picked up a self-published book. I'm like, yeah, I think it reminded him of Alien. And they're like, okay, I've got to read that. So I knew that advice was horrible, and I ignored it and went, my own way, and had enormous success with the promotion. I knew I would be uncomfortable trying to tell people that this was a great book. I was more interested in telling people that, hey, I'd written something, this is who I am, this is my background, these are the things that I like. Maybe you'll like my story too, I don't know. I think that's more honest and more interesting to the reader than giving them a rundown of the plot. Another thing I think publishers get wrong is to not offer all formats at the same time. I struggled with my publisher here in the U.S. to offer the hardback and the paperback at the same time. And I knew as a bookseller that a lot of readers only read one format, that windowing, trying to make all the money on the hardback before you release the paperback just loses the paperback audience. And so we released the hardback and paperback together. All it did was increase the demand for the hardback. People in their mind, they were like, okay, I'm going to pay $15 for the paperback. The hardback is only $10 more. So I'm basically getting the hardback for $10. That's the calculation that we make in our heads. And this kind of upselling works with cars. It works with meals. It works in a lot of other ways. So I knew it would work as a bookseller when we released both formats, and they both hit the New York Times bestseller list concurrently. I don't know if that had ever been done before. Even having seen it work, I don't think a publisher has done it since, which is just bizarre to me. As a bookseller, I was always begging publishers to give us all the formats at the same time: ebook, hardback, paperback. If you buy the hardback, you should get the ebook and even a digital download of the audiobook for free. These are the things that a lot of self-published authors are doing that publishers should be immediately jumping on board with.
So switching gears just a bit, one of the things that caught my eye in the bio that we got about you was that you were before you started writing, you were a yacht captain.
Yeah, I guess that's weird. It's funny, someone just posted yesterday on my Facebook page, a librarian friend of mine, that two of the big job shortages right now are librarians and yacht captains. I don't know. I've never seen those two occupations put in the same sentence together, but it was pretty funny that a librarian friend of mine shared that with me. I moved onto a small sailboat while I was in college just to save money. And after my junior year, I sailed off to the Bahamas for a year and just went island hopped around the Bahamas. And that led to working on other people's boats. And then I spent a decade as a yacht captain and got to live in a lot of cool places, see a lot of the world, meet a lot of people, and got into a lot of adventures. And that all affected my writing. I mean, writing's something I've dreamed of doing since I was very young, but being a yacht captain gave me the life experiences, I think, and to have something possibly worth writing about.
For anyone that's listening, how does one break into yacht captaining?
It is criminally easy. Someone should be investigating the fact that I was, 23, 24 years old and driving $25 million yachts up and down the East Coast and in the Caribbean with no supervision. I mean, I was constantly baffled by the fact that this industry of, wealthy, this is the most expensive thing that wealthy people own, and they're peopled by vagabonds from all over the world who are in their 20s. It's unbelievable. If you want to break in, you go to Fort Lauderdale and move into one of the crew houses there, which is like a hostel. You'll meet a lot of South African and Australian and Bahamian and people from Great Britain. And you go beat the docks. You offer to wash boats, to scrub decks. You see if anybody needs a deckhand for a delivery, and you just get experience and work your way up. You get certifications, get your captain's license. Anybody can do it. It's amazing how easy it is. You just have to be able to put up with a pretty bizarre lifestyle of living away from home, kind of like on military deployment. And you are living in tight confines with other people. I think these are good life experiences, but I would recommend this over going to college for people who have a love of the sea and a love of travel. I'm a college dropout. My wife has her doctorate, and our financial situations when we met 12 years ago were completely opposite. She had crushing debt, and I was making incredible money. And I don't know, there's something to learn from that. I'm not sure what it is.
Do you still sail on your own?
Yeah, matter of fact, my plan is to move back on board a boat here in the next year or two, and then in about 3 years, my wife and I are going to take off for a 5 or 6 year circumnavigation and sail around the world. And I can write while I'll probably get more writing done because I won't have access to the internet much of the time. And I'll constantly be inspired by the places that we're going to. So, but right now we get out when we can. I charter a boat when I can, and we just went on a sea trial with a boat recently. So we're on the water enough to stay inspired by it.
So while you're captaining these yachts, did you have it in the back of your mind that eventually you wanted to kind of leave that and become a writer, or was it just kind of by chance that you happened to decide to become, or like publish your first novel while you were captaining the yachts?
Writing a book has been on my bucket list since I was, 12 or 13 years old. Just as an avid reader, something I've always dreamed about. I always thought that I would do that much later in life, like in my 40s or 50s, as I was slowing down in my travels. But while I was working on boats, I told myself I would never own a house. I would never not live on boats. I spent 5 years living on my little 27-foot sailboat, and I loved it, not owning much, having the freedom to move around and see new places. So I told myself I would do it forever. Then, I met a girl, and that's the end of the sailing life for a lot of sailors. But I've held on to that philosophy. My wife and I live in a 900 square foot house, which is, our last house was 750 square feet. And we love the simplicity, we love the lifestyle, and it's going to make moving back onto a boat seamless for me.
Okay. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. So I noticed in the you mentioned that you retained your ebook rights. What what led to that decision? What was the thought process there?
Yeah, so that got a lot of press when that happened because I was told, that these deals just didn't happen. No Big Five publisher had ever done a print-only deal where the author retained their ebook rights, not in the modern era. Some old contracts didn't include them because ebooks weren't really a thing yet. But when I started getting offers for Wool, so Wool took off as a self-published title and hit the New York Times bestseller list. We did the film deal with Ridley Scott. I signed foreign contracts in Brazil and in Taiwan, a pretty big deal with Random House in the UK. But we kept turning down the offers here in the US because they were offering me what they thought were significant advances, and it was what I made in a month off my ebook sales. And they constantly lagged my success. Like as their offers got better, my earnings were going up, and it was never enough for me to give up control of my control and ownership of my artwork. One of the things that would have happened if I had sold my ebook rights is they would have doubled or tripled the price of my ebooks, and it would have crushed my sales. I don't know why publishers do this. It's absolutely crazy to me that they try to protect their print sales by charging more for ebooks than we're used to paying for the mass market paperbacks when we were growing up, or used to paying for print books. So I told everyone from the beginning that the ebook rights were off the table. It's not something that I would even negotiate. And nobody wanted the print rights. My agent got a little miffed at me for saying this in one of the meetings, but I told them, like, I'll let you have my print rights for nothing just to go play with it and see what you can do. And this is despite the fact that I was making enough off my print sales to live off of. But I was still willing to give that up to see what a publisher could do if they could prove themselves to me. And the only publisher that, after 8 months of turning down 6 and then 7-figure offers, the only publisher that came forward with an innovative deal was Simon & Schuster. And they did a print release, and they only took the print rights, and they only took them for 7 years. And no one had ever done a contract like that before. And I am forever in their debt for believing in me and for doing something innovative, and for hopefully setting a precedent and showing that this can be successful for authors and publishers to partner rather than for authors to be acquired.
So one of the kind of
divergence here, but I'm kind of curious. Since we mostly spend our time talking about open source, I'm curious what it is. Any chance you're using LibreOffice or OpenOffice to write your books in, or what is it that you work in?
I mostly do my writing in Pages. Just it's not a good platform for writing, but it's good for getting rid of distractions. The way my MacBook Air, I leave Pages in full screen mode, and so I can do a 3-finger swipe, and that's my way of turning off the internet. Nothing can pop up. There are no distractions. I keep the notification center turned off, so I'm just in a black screen with my document. But I do use a lot of Google software to help. Google Docs are very critical for sharing information between me and anthologists that I work with, and my editors, other authors. So that's been Google Docs and Google Drive have been a huge asset. But I have used things like GIMP to do book cover design. This is before I could afford Photoshop. What I love about open source software is that it has a democratizing effect where you don't have to be wealthy to afford the tools that you can use to create book covers and to do formatting. There's also a great free program called Calibre or Calibre, I've heard it pronounced both ways, that you can use to format books in different ways and to organize your ebooks. So yeah, I don't know how people would have these creative careers if there weren't all these tools that are free for people to use or to trial, or open source tools. It gives us the ability to compete with the companies that can afford, multi-$1,000 multi-user licenses.
We're getting close to the end of the hour. I wanted to give you an opportunity. Is there anything we haven't asked you about, or anything we haven't talked about that you wanted to mention?
I think the biggest thing is just that I'm seeing literature get back to the roots of storytelling, and I think if you look at, I grew up on a farm, and the way we would get some things done, where people would get together, like if we had to take in the hay, people would come and volunteer to throw bales of hay, and when they needed something, we would go do that, go help them out, and it wasn't really a barter system. It was just kind of a need-based system, and I loved that culture. I loved growing up like that. I love that model that my dad provided to see how that worked, and I see that in open source. It's hey, what can I do to help out? I want to be a part of this. I want to build something together, and I think that's what's happening in literature right now. You see box sets with multiple authors selling their books together. Authors creating anthologies on their own, not publishers hiring out things that they think will sell, but authors getting excited to contribute stories, original stories, to anthologies that have a theme. So I think these things are all interrelated. We see it in video gaming, we see it in art, we see it in programming, we see it in literature. It's the beauty of raising a barn together, and it's what happens when technology brings people together from all over the world and makes distribution and production more affordable. If you have leisure time, the tools are right there to throw in with other people and make something that is grander and full of more wisdom and beauty and subtlety than anything you could generate on your own.
Thanks very much, Hugh. Really appreciate it. Once again, real quick, where can people find you, find out more, find you on Twitter or whatnot?
Everything's just my name, Hugh Howey. So it's, Hugh Howey at hotmail, at gmail.com, on Twitter, on Facebook. There's another Hugh Howey out there. He's in Australia. I've met him. He's a big strapping guy. He could pound me into the ground if he wanted to, but he was a little bit behind me, and he's a couple years younger, and I got everything before he did. So, he's an imposter, basically.
He is sick of getting your mail, or maybe it's the other way around. All right. Thank you very much, Hugh. So you can catch Hugh doing a keynote this year at ApacheCon Europe. Gareth, what do you think? Are you so your Great American Novel, are you going to be doing that as self-publishing?
You know what? If I ever got up the nerve and the ability to write a great American novel, I think I would go the self-publishing route. It definitely seems the smart way to go in current present times.
All right. Anything that you want to talk about before we wrap up the hour? Anything you're working on or want to discuss?
No, I think I am good.
Okay, I think the scale call for papers. I don't think the scale is accepting popes right now, but I think they are accepting talks.
Not yet. We have a couple more months to go before we do the papal selection. Yeah, no, we we do have the call for papers open. So if anyone's interested in speaking at scale 13x, the call for papers is open now. You can visit the website socallinuxexpo.org. Find all the relevant information there. The deadline will be December 15th, I believe. So yeah.
Look for the white smoke from Los Angeles, and we'll know who the next pope of scale. I'm gonna bring a large hat to scale this year. So anyway, well, thanks, Gareth. Once again, I'm Joe Brockmeier. You can find me on the Twitters as JZB. I'm working mostly on Project Atomic these days. You can find that at projectatomic.io. You've been listening to Floss Weekly, and thanks very much for joining us.